Hi, welcome to this video. This video is about policy and procedures for church safety and security teams. This is probably one of the bigger things that we see when it comes to safety and security teams is they're trying to figure out how to write a policy and procedure for their safety and security teams. Some teams have a safety team, some teams have a security team, some churches have both integrated together. And so we just want to give you a basic guideline and understanding of where to begin with these. A lot of times guys don't know where to start and they don't have one into place, or they get stuck rewriting outdated ones. And so we just want to be helpful to you and give you some guidance on that. However, this isn't legal advice, it's just a basic guideline to write them. Okay, you should always consult an attorney, and we will talk about that later on. Probably one of the larger questions that we get a lot of when it pertains to policy and procedures is why do we need them? Now, writing policy and procedures is a very overwhelming task, and a lot of times guys are just drained from doing it, don't know where to start. It's just very overwhelming. So that's I'm assuming why they ask, well, what do we even need these for? Well, let's talk about this for a second because it's actually a very good question and it does have a specific purpose. So basically, what policies and procedures do is they outline the standards and expectations of that organization and how it should be ran, right? It also helps your teams run with quality. All right. You are responsible for your safety and security team, so you're responsible for how it's ran, how it's conducted. And if you're on the team, you're responsible for adhering to those standards and the policies and procedures. The other reason we write them is because it reduces the chances of litigation. And believe it or not, churches do go through quite a bit of litigation throughout their lifetime. And so we want to reduce that. It also reduces a situation from turning into a crisis. Now, everybody knows someone who has experienced this at one point in time where, they run into a situation and they don't know what to do. And, they might be semi calm and freaking out. And then when they figure out they don't know what to do, like it becomes a real dramatic problem and that makes the things worse. Okay. And so that's what also it helps with is it reduces the situations from just going really bad. It also works to help us abide and learn about the laws that could change or that are in place, and the same thing with regulations as they change as well. Um, One of the examples that we give is the gun laws. You know, some churches don't know that you can conceal carry in a church or even that you can have a church security team and what that entails. And so, if we look at the laws, like, is it acceptable in the state of Michigan? Yeah, it is. And so we don't tend to know those laws, but it's more than just knowing the laws that you can carry inside of a church. It's also knowing the laws that pertain to conceal carry and gun ownership. And so we want to be able to put these into our policies and procedures and all the other things that we might have questions for or ways to conduct them as laws and regulations change. All right, so now let's discover what policies and procedures are. Okay, for one, it's got to be noted that this is a document that changes. There's no document or no policy and procedure that stays the same. And so earlier I said that, sometimes guys do have a policy and procedure for their teams and then it's outdated. Okay, so your policy and procedure should be updated regularly. Like as situation happens, you want to take notes. Maybe what works for one doesn't work for the other. Maybe just different things arise that you didn't expect to happen. And so just know that a policy and procedure is a living document for your organization. All right, it's fluid. It also outlines the practices, okay, of the organization, the goals and the vision, the mission. So for your guys on your safety and security teams, you need to have your own specific visions and goals for that team. They just need to marry the church's goals and visions, but have your goals and visions be in unity with the church and for yourselves individually. Okay. They establish boundaries and responsibilities for your day-to-day operations for you and your team and the people, everyone involved in it. And they also, policies are a set of predetermined guidelines in the course of action you should take. So policies in general terms, they're just rules and guidelines. All right. And then procedures, those are just the procedures. They give a specific explanation to the plan that carry out the policy. So your policy is the rules and the guidelines of situations, what you're willing to accept and what you're not, what you can do and what you can't do, kind of thing. And then your procedures give a proper explanation of how to handle those situations. All right. And then it also is important to know that it gives leaders the ability to mitigate situations and kind of take control of them. And that helps to prevent anything from happening, any kind of damages, whether they're physical or emotional damages or lawsuits to the organization. So these are two separate documents. I'm trying to build an understanding of that. They're not one and the same. They're not the same thing. Your policies are different from your procedures. They just marry themselves together. All right. Are there dangers for not having policy and procedures? 100% absolutely. Even though this is a challenging task for the safety and security team, they're a must have. The dangers of not having them is you're leaving both sides um, the opinions. You know, there's no rules, so everyone's got an opinion, and what they think is the best course of action to take, that's what they're going to take, and sometimes they don't even know why. And so, if we fail to have policy and procedures, that shows the congregation or other ministry departments as well as the guys on our team that there are no rules. And that is exactly what they'll do. We've seen it time after time again, is when a situation happens, they're kind of just they're winging it and throwing everything out there that they can, um, and making it up as they go. So we definitely don't want to see that happen because that does create a lot of problems. So that's part of the dangers of not having a policy and procedure. Also, if your team or your church is ever part of litigation, that is a predetermining factor. The courts will ask for your policy and procedures to see if you handled that situation correctly. And so a lot of times that determines the outcome of the lawsuit. The other reason we want to have these is the danger of we don't know how effective our team is, which is very critical. We want to know that our operations are running smoothly, our teams are running smoothly, everything on our end is good to go. And so we will be able to see that through our policies and procedures because now we have a standard to judge them by. They'll also help us reduce the loss of assets. Now, some people say, "Oh, assets, for a church, like how bad can that be?" And they don't understand that, the buses that go and pick up people, those are assets. The TVs that the kids watch and play on at church, and the equipment, and the building itself. Some churches also own other properties or sister churches. All right, some churches have houses attached to them, that the pastor or the deacons or whoever lives in. And so understand that those are still assets. The other side of the coin that I think the church fails to see a lot of times, maybe this isn't so much the church security team, but the church in a whole, at least with larger churches or churches that have online streaming, is cybersecurity is a real thing. I think it's probably the number three top biggest problem for churches is their cybersecurity. And so you can lose a lot of assets through that. And we want to make sure that we have a standard to follow when it comes to the loss of our assets and cybersecurity as well. Doesn't mean we have to have IT techs and cybersecurity guys on our team. It just means we need to have something in place and an organization that does. If we don't have a policy and procedure, another danger is the neglect of the training needs of standard. And so the one of the examples that I have for this is a fellow from he was up north a ways, and the question he asked was, our church concealed carries, it's our security team, but they have no formal training. They don't train regularly or even have a qualification course. What are the dangers in that? And could we, like, what's the scoop? And I said, well, yeah, that's very dangerous. I mean, you can't even call that a security team. That's just a bunch of guys that go to church that are, they passed a CPL class, which is the bare minimum training standards and requirements for the state. Okay, that don't even count as training. And so what's going to happen is if a situation comes down the pipeline here, someone's going to ask, well, is there anything you could have done that would have prevented you from drawing your gun? Like, what course of action could you have taken differently? And questions like that will be asked in court. And if a situation also happens, they're going to ask, what is the level of training that those guys have? So you're standing in a courtroom. Well, I don't know. They took a CPL class. That's not really going to go over well. And so we want to make sure that through our policy and procedure, we are setting a standard for our own guys. And I'm not just saying that just about guns. That's with anything. Whether it's hand to hand or you know trafficking, situations that might happen, whatever it may be, you need to set your training standards to your policy and procedure and adhere to those because these are all dangers. There are some more dangers, but I just want to be very basic about this today. All right, so moving on, this is a situation that I just want to use to kind of illustrate our policy and procedures. So as we get to our policy and procedures and we're starting to write down what our procedures might be for situations, understand that we need to look at this through several different lenses. First, we have to know what our goals and our mission is on the team, and that would be in our policy. And once we figure that out, now we can predetermine our actions, right? Well, you will find if you don't have a policy and procedure, you will find situations that you're going to have to look at and say, how does this pertain to us? Like, where is this our job? Kind of thing, right? So I'm going to use this to kind of just give you a like not a demonstration, but an illustration. We do have policies and procedures on our team, and we help other facilities create theirs and give them ideas and things like that. And even though we have our own set, we have never experienced this problem before. And so a Sunday morning, we do our thing. We've done our advances and all that, and we're starting our daily things. And when the offering happens, like we have our own set of policies for this and procedures. And so our policy is security doesn't touch the money. Okay. We just watch over the money. The ushers are the ones that pick it up, collect it, and then we follow them to wherever they're going. So they're doing their thing. They're collecting the offering, and me and another security guy are standing there, and there's three ushers that are awaiting the last usher, and we have this situation going on. And so I politely go over and I say, well, what's the holdup? Are you okay? And she says, well, he's asking for change. He wants to give, but he's asking for change. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, what would you do? All right. And I said, I don't know. What's your policy? You guys are the ones that pick up the offering. What's your policy and procedures say? I don't know. And apparently there wasn't. So the ushers were like, oh yeah, you can, no you can't, yeah you can, no you can't. Nobody knew. So this is an example of how chaotic it goes. And or no one knows or kind of makes up their own rules. And this is a good example too of how the situation could have turned into something really small, but turned into something big like a crisis because this guy could have gotten fed up, frustrated, maybe felt judged, whatever. This situation with just the ushers and this individual could have went a couple different ways. And we didn't talk about it right then and there, but it definitely was a talking point after the fact. So, long story short, what we did is I said, hey, let's uh, let the guy give change. Here's what we're going to do. We don't handle the money, but we watch the money. And so you're going to fold the money over the bucket so that he can see it, you can see it, and we can see it. and you're going to reach in the bucket and grab out his change and count it to him so that I can see it, you can see it, and he can see it, and give it back, give him his change. And she said, okay, that works. Now, in that particular situation, it was very awkward, and I did the same thing. I made up the rules as I went. However, the situation was only getting more awkward as it went, and so we had to stop that from happening. And not justifying my actions, but that's what me and my other security guy did. And so we got his change, we walked out, you know, and after we got the ushers to where they were going, we found some leaders in the church and we said, hey, we had this situation happen and nobody knew the policy and we didn't have a set of procedures to go by. What is the policy for making change in the offering bucket and what steps should we have taken? And he said, well, what did you do? I told him what we did, and he said, I think that was the right course of action. He's like, that should be noted. And we took note of that whole situation, and uh, come to find out you can make change in the offering bucket. And they gave their explanations on why, and then they said, this is how we do it. And so it was up to them, the leaders, to say, okay, this is what our policy is going to be because we don't want to not let somebody give. And we, of course, we talked about it and gave our scripture references and the ideas that we shared and things like that. And so we determined that it was better to let someone give change in the offering bucket than to not let them give it all. But the procedure that we took for that was the security guys have to stand there, watch, we don't handle money, and our actions were appropriate. However, when I tell you that you have to look at this through multiple lenses, we did not discuss do we what do we do if it's a $50 bill or a $100 bill, because counterfeits are a real thing. It happens quite often in Lansing. Actually, I think it happens quite often in Michigan, period. But I know for a while in Lansing it was happening quite a bit around the holidays, and so, but it happens. And so now we have to figure out what we're going to do for larger bills. And so as we look at these situations, we can't just look at one thing that happened, say, okay, yeah, we think that was the right thing to do. However, we do have to go back and say, okay, well, what could happen out of this? And so when you're putting together your procedures, you have to be able to see past one solution or past one problem to come up with a good determination of what you're going to do. So for that particular situation, he didn't give a $50 or $100 bill, but if he would have, that's probably a good idea to reject or deny him, giving at that very week. We could have simply put in and said, hey, don't worry about it. We can't give you change for that. Just give next week what you can. But thank you, and been polite about it and went our way. So just to kind of give you an example of something that we had never experienced before, but definitely can go sideways on an individual level, the usher ministry level, the security team ministry level, and how it could have damaged the church's reputation as well. So we definitely uh, want to take note of those things. Okay, so now we'll get into kind of developing the policy and procedures. First, guys, understand that this is not going to get drafted overnight. It's going to go through revision after revision after revision. And the one thing that you want to do is make sure that you have an attorney look it over. Okay, even your brainstorms, don't try to wait until 6 months go down the road and you think you got your final draft and then hand it to an attorney and say, hey, can you proofread my document, make sure it's acceptable and abides by all the laws and the wording in it is acceptable, because words do matter. You do definitely want to bring this to your attorney. Not all churches have attorneys on retainer, so you're going to have to find one that has a free consultation. Maybe find one in the congregation that might give you some of his time. You know, um, Attorneys are very difficult to find because you have to also make sure that it follows the guidelines and the practices of defense, of security. You certainly don't want to get a real estate attorney to look over your security documents. Maybe a business attorney could be a good option, maybe, but uh, definitely try to find an attorney that's got a clear understanding. The other thing you're going to want to seek out is a little bit of information about your insurance company, because that also has to line up with your policy and procedures. Okay, if you get into a situation and it wasn't handled in a manner that's going to uh, kind of please your insurance company, chances are they're not going to get involved, and then that's a different problem to have. Guys, I'll tell you, I've never been to a church where the board or the leadership was willing just to hand over an insurance policy. Typically, you're going to have to say, hey, this is the ideas I was floating around, and how does this work with our insurance? Some things may not, but definitely as we consider, certain medical things, we have good Samaritan laws. However, if you got, EMS on your team, they may not be able to follow good Samaritan laws. They may have to act because that is their profession. And so you always want to kind of make sure that certain things are being adhered to when it comes to your insurance policy. Talking to the pastors, the board, and the helps department. Those are going to be pretty critical. You're going to have to go through them to get approval on some things. However, don't go up with them with every single problem. Just start drafting and brainstorming what your policies and procedures should be and getting ideas on how to mitigate problems. And then once you have a pretty fair amount, take that to your pastors and your board and even the helps department and say, hey, this is what we're coming up with. Like, is this acceptable? How can we change this? How can we make it better? Does it fit? And, you know, guys, when it comes to threats, everyone's got a different idea of what a threat might be. And everyone has a different opinion on a good course of action might be. And sometimes people think within situational guidelines instead of unsituational guidelines. There's no there's no threat that comes down the pipeline that's going to be based on that specific situation and the surroundings all the time. And so you just have to do the best you can, but be open minded about different avenues of the way to handle situations. Excuse me. Our helps department, that's what they're there for. And you should always, if they are separate from the board, you should always go to them first before going to the board, because you don't want to overwhelm the board or the pastors. Now, if your pastor's just completely not, into this, we had this situation. We were helping another faith-based organization, and the security director just came to me with some things, and he said, "Man, I don't really know what to do. Like, can you help me?" And so we went to the church, and the pastor was there, and I said, hey, pastor, we're putting together the policy and procedures, as you know, and so we've came across this thing where we're working on stabbings and active shooters, and my question is what would you prefer us to do if an active shooter came into the church or someone tried to stab you? What happens to you? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I mean, do you want us to take you to a safe room? Is there another location? Do you want us to not put our hands on you and get you out of here? Do you want to fight for yourself? Like, what would you like to see happen? And he said, I never thought about that before. See, so suddenly I grabbed his attention based on something that pertained to him. Now, the other side of this coin, too, is as you're talking about this with even your security team and your security guys, and all the people involved, someone is going to ask the question, well, what's so special about him? Even your congregation, if they're involved at all or they know about this, they're probably going to say, well, what's so special about the pastor? What makes him so different? Absolutely nothing. And don't be afraid to be honest about it. There's nothing special about your pastor. However, this thing that separates him from everybody else is most pastors are the main and only decision maker of that church. They are also the main and only person that has the ability to collectively pull together a team or by themselves with a little bit of help, kind of as they see fit, I guess, to pull the community back together, and to bring the organization back to a functional basis. And so if a real dramatic situation happens and there's no one else in charge and there's no policy and procedure, he is the guy to go to for that. And because he runs the operation, he is the head of the table in that specific organization, something needs to happen with him. Now, I've been to churches and we brought this question to the pastor, and the pastor said, "Dude, leave me there, man. I'll fight. I'll fight for myself or shoot from the pulpit. I don't care. Get the people to safety." Every church is going to vary different on this. But when you mention that to a pastor, a lot of times it's a good place for them to be like, "Oh." So, and that's only for people who, can't get through to their pastors, because I've had pastors to come up and say, "Well, I don't care. This is what I gave him the security director position for. He has to figure it out." Okay, well, maybe that's you. You still have to get those plans together and then relay them to him. So all of the things that you're putting in your policy and procedures, they do need to go up to the chain of command and get approval. All right. Now, for security directors, let me just encourage you to keep going, because you guys are the ones that primarily are left with this task. And it is a very time consuming task. It's a very frustrating task. It's got a lot of avenues to it. It's a very lengthy task, especially if you don't have something already into place. Be patient with it. Okay. I encourage you to just draft out your brainstorm, bounce it off of the rest of the guys on your team, and sometimes you can contact law enforcement and say, "Hey, man, I'm trying to draft a policy and procedure and I need help on what do you think would be the best avenue, or give me some tactics that I could use for A, B, and C situation." Officers are a great resource. You don't want to you know, overwhelm them and be like a Karen to them, but from time to time it's not a bad idea, because officers are pulled into all kinds of different situations. I mean, trafficking, shooting, medical situations, cats stuck in trees, like just everything. And so they're a great resource to draw from, as long as you're not absorbing their family time and kind of inconveniencing them. Don't do that. But ask them, "Hey, man, have you ever had this situation before? And what did you do about it? And if it happened again, what would you do differently?" So there's some pretty practical advice coming from officers, and that's a great resource for you. I hope this helped. Like and share if you liked it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.